Hello, everyone. We are glad that you are here with us. Please let us know what school you're from and how many students are watching if you're in your classroom with your teacher. We are going to visit the giant Aldabra Tortoises encounter at the Sedgwick County Zoo. Teachers, please remember, if you haven't had a chance to watch The Tortoise and the Hare, it is on our Adventure website. And feel free, right when you get done with this, to watch that, and then you can do that compare and contrast activity that's there. That's my introduction. I'm going to hand it over to the stars of the show, those three beautiful tortoises, and the humans that help them.
Well, hello, everybody, and good afternoon. Thank you first so much for all of you guys that are here with us today, as well as those that have been with us all morning. I'm Shanae. I'm the Curator of Education and Farms here at Sedgwick County Zoo, and I am blessed to have Josh with me as well. Josh is one of our keepers here in our ectotherm department, but Smoke is right. The real stars of the show are between Josh and I. Josh, tell us a little bit about where we are and who we're visiting with.
All right, so we have our three giant Aldabra tortoises. They are the second largest tortoise species in the world. We have one male, a boy, his name is Speed, and we have two girls, our ladies back here. And this is Washington, and Missy's over here right behind me. And these tortoises can be found in the Aldabra Atoll area off the east coast of Africa, near the Seychelles. It's the only place in the world where they live. They don't really have any predators on the island. They are the top animal on the islands that they live on, which is primarily rocky, sparse grassland and just billowing ocean. And so here at the zoo, we just take care of these three, but they can live they live close together, but not really are social animals. They can live upwards to about 200 years and more. We're unable to tell what the maximum is because it's very hard to keep track of how long these live across multiple people taking care of them. But we know that the average is usually upwards of 180 years, 190 years old. Our tortoises here, we don't know how old they are exactly, but we know that they are at least 50 years or older. So they could be in their hundreds or they could be as young as 55, 56.
And Josh, why is that? Why sometimes with some animal species that are in human care, how come we don't know how old they are?
Well, some animals come to us from the wild. And so all three of our individuals here, they didn't come to Sedgwick County first, but they all came from the wild and they were adults already. So we did not know how old they were when they got picked up so many years ago out in the wild. And so all we know is they were adults. They've been with us this long. This is about how old we can tell.
So we just watched Tortoise and the Hare, or maybe you will right after this, but watching the tortoises here, I think that they're maybe a little more speedy than people give them credit for.
People always think that they're very, very, very slow, and really they don't need to move around as much because tortoises like these are grazers and browsers. They're taking advantage of whatever food they happen to find along the way. Most of the time in the wild, that's grasses. Here, we feed them leafy greens and vegetables. Sometimes we give them fruit, but really all they need are stuff with high vitamin content, high mineral content, and fiber.
So for those of you that were with us at the commissary, you saw us in the produce. Remember, we spend about $4,000 every week on produce. Much of that then can come down here. Now we're watching Speed eat right now. Do they have teeth?
So they do not have teeth. Tortoises and turtles have beaks. Sometimes they're serrated, like with our tortoises. Sometimes they're just a sharp blade. So what they do is that they take their serrated beaks and they pull apart the food as much as they can. They can't really chew like we can. They have a little bit of side where they can kind of grind, but it's not like us in any sense of the word. So they like to break off big portions of food and just swallow that whole.
Now, I've sometimes heard tortoises, large tortoises like this, be described as the elephants of the reptile world because they really have the ability to change their habitats, somewhat similar to elephants because of their grazing and that that really hefty body.
And so, yeah, you'll see that if you come to the zoo and you come during the wintertime or early spring, you'll see this yard just become full of grass, super tall, spread out over this entire area. You can see we still have a little bit left, but when we come and we let them out in the springtime, they immediately start grazing that down, and they'll kind of move from whichever patch is higher. They won't eat it all the way down. They might stomp it away, but it'll always come back, and they'll always come to continue grazing on that food. So yes, they can change their habitats a lot just because of their weight and the way that they move from area to area.
So you mentioned weight.
Weight,
I know
yes.
Normally we don't ask a lady how much she weighs, but how much do we think these guys weigh?
So maximum weight is around 400, 450 for males. Speed is less than 400. I would probably put him about 350, 375. Females can get a bit over 200 pounds. Both of our ladies are probably around 170, 180. So they're not the heaviest recorded, but they're still pretty sizable.
They're still hefty. There's a lot of myths about turtles and shells.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the anatomy of a turtle?
So when you guys see their shell, a lot of people see the cartoons and they see tortoises and turtles leaving their shells. They cannot do that. The shell is a part of them when they hatch and will be a part of them until they pass away. And so a shell is actually a very, very thick layer of keratin. And we have keratin in our body. We grow it on our fingernails, our toenails, and our hair. And it's very thin in those areas, but they grow very, very thick layers on bony plates all over their back. And their spines are fused to the inside of that. So they can never leave their shell. And people always ask, can they feel when we touch their shells? Yes, but not to the same extent it would be as skin-to-skin contact. So they definitely know if somebody's pushing on them from behind or touching them on the top, because you need to be able to feel where that is, and they would not lose that ability.
So when we look at the shells, I noticed that there's some rough marks and some grooves. Is that something that they wear off and it can grow back?
So yes, so shells are there for protection. So what they do is they help the tortoise be protected from any scrapes, any falls, anything like that. And so you can't see scratches or dents or chips away as long as that doesn't reach the soft tissue underneath, just as underneath your fingernails. It's perfectly fine. And over time, as they replace those layers of keratin, it will come back.
Now, what about the pool here? I noticed they've got a nice big area. Do they like to get down in the water?
Yes. So tortoises and turtles, like all reptiles, most reptiles are ectothermic or cold-blooded. We use the term cold-blooded sometimes, and that means they can't regulate their own body temperature. So in order to get up to the point to digest or move around, they need to be able to get warm and get cold. And so one of the ways they can help cool down their bodies is to go into the water or go into the shade. And if they need to heat up, they're laying out in the sun, they're basking, they're getting warm.
Now, you guys know earlier, if you're with us, we had a whole discussion on scat. I can't help but notice we have some turtle scat right here. So for any of our scat fans from earlier, by gosh, right here, fresh scat. For those of you that missed our scat chat, scat is feces or poop. Now, poop is pretty important to us here at the zoo. Thank you. Poop is pretty important to us here at the zoo, as we talked about with Scat Chat, because it often allows us to tell whether an animal is healthy or not. It allows us to tell if there's any changes in how it's digesting things. And it's so important that we even have a grading scale for scat so that we can tell if it's too soft, too hard, too dry, too wet. So as a zookeeper, it's always important to look at some of those different things to help us determine the health of these animals, especially as they continue to age and to continue to grow. Now, one of the things I know we talked about earlier are those ears. Tell us how their ears are different than ours.
So it might be hard to see on the video, but you guys can see maybe on Speed as he walks this way, they do have ears. They're not as complex as ours. They're right down there. They don't have any of the fancy canals and shaping that we do for external ears, but they have that membrane across the top, and they have some inner ear mechanics as well. So they can still hear, just not the same sounds that we are able to hear.
Speaking of sounds, do they make sounds?
Yes. So the tortoises do make sounds. You can hear them sometimes when you're at the zoo if they get up from a stretch, or they're stretching out for the day. They'll make like a low grunt or a low moan. If you surprise them and they retract their heads inside, you can kind of get a hiss as the escape of air in order to make room for their bodies. And so they can also make that hissing sound without doing that if they're irritated or want you to get away from them.
Now, we mentioned they have such a long life.
Yes.
We were talking earlier that turtle females can reproduce their entire lifespan.
Pretty much their entire lifespan, yes.
They are egg layers. Can you tell us a little bit about turtle eggs?
So Aldabra tortoises are one of the species that can mate and create eggs almost year-round. They typically only do it once a year, like most animals, but they're very close to the equator. So that means that they're pretty much active year-round. And so they'll go through a mating season. The females, if you see their toes, they have very long nails on those back toes, and those are for digging. The females will dig a nest, lay upwards of anywhere from 20 to 40 eggs, bury those eggs, and then the tortoises will eventually hatch.
I know somebody's going to ask, do we have eggs laid here?
No, we don't. We have not had any eggs laid here at Sedgwick County, which isn't a bad thing. There are a lot of other zoos that have a lot of success with these animals and are able to produce them in captivity. So it's not a bad thing, but if we got them, it would be a nice surprise.
Now, obviously, these are super fun tortoises to watch because they're so big. But tell us about turtle conservation as a whole. Are turtles animals that have conservation need, or are they pretty healthy populations in the wild?
So it definitely depends on the species and what different conditions they are. For our tortoises that we're looking at right now, they are still considered threatened, mostly because of over-collection out in the wild. It is, you no longer can collect these animals from the wild. The Aldabra atoll is pretty much closed off from collection means. So the animals you see in the zoos were either animals that were brought in before that or were produced here in the United States or at another facility somewhere else in the world.
What if somebody finds, now we're obviously never going to find a turtle this size, but what if somebody finds a turtle in their yard? Should they keep it as a pet? What should they do in those scenarios?
I would never recommend just picking up a turtle that you find in your yard and keeping it as a pet. Those animals are wild and are not domesticated in the same way. You could be exposing yourself to diseases that they are very tolerant to. And also, you could be disrupting that animal's life cycle or seasonal cycle, bringing in an animal when it's about to turn wintertime and keeping them under a heat lamp when they're used to cycling could shock their system.
I know in education we get people often that have collected a red-eared slider or a box turtle in the spring when it was fun, and now that it comes winter, they're wanting to know what to do with it. So we really do encourage that if you see a turtle or another wild animal, take time to learn about it. Watch with your eyes, listen with your ears, but don't touch with your hands. If you spend that time learning about them instead of trying to bring them in, you will be helping actually turtle populations in the long run, because as Josh said, that animal will still be out there to be able to reproduce, to lay eggs, and to continue to have more turtles in your backyard instead of just one in your house. So really, really important, good thing to be able to follow. Another thing that we always focus on too, and again, not something we'd worry about with the Aldabras, but if you find a turtle crossing the road, we get asked a lot, what should we do? One of the things that we always recommend is let your big person, little guys, you should not be in the road yourselves chasing down turtles, but let the adult that you're with, if you can, safely park the car, get out, move the turtle in the direction it was going and not back the way it was coming. However, you have to be very careful because a turtle needs to protect itself. And as we've talked about, Josh mentioned they have a very sharp bony beak, some of them even serrated, meaning they're kind of rough. And if a turtle does not know, they don't know what you're doing, so they could just as easily try and turn around and bite. And even though they might appear slow, Josh, can they move pretty fast?
They can move pretty fast, and turtles are even faster than tortoises.
Turtles are even faster than tortoises. So being very, very careful. We know there's a lot of people out there that want to know what they can do to protect our native turtles that we have. Helping them make sure that they don't become part of the road is a great idea, but also making sure that you stay safe, and then making sure that you wash your hands afterwards. Josh mentioned that the turtles can carry some different diseases that could make us sick that maybe don't make them too sick. So all those important things to think about all the time. Josh, when are the Aldabras most active here? What's the best time to come out and see them?
The best time to come see them is pretty much any time in the summer. You'll see them sleeping during the day, as all animals do around midday, but out in the morning when the sun starts to come up, they need to get their body temperatures up so they can become active, they can graze, they can digest their food. So morning after sunrise, and I would say later in the afternoon.
Kind of like when I'm the most active,
yes.
too. Winter is coming upon us.
Yes.
What changes will happen here with the Aldabra yard come winter and with the Aldabras themselves?
So come winter time, actually even early fall, if the temperatures get cold enough, we'll bring them inside because they won't be able to regulate their temperatures anymore. We'll bring them inside so they can remain at a stable temperature. We'll let the yard grow the grass it needs to over the winter time. We'll drain the water down so nothing bad happens to it. And when it starts warming back up, we'll give them access back outside.
What are our temperatures that we look for?
So we generally like to keep them inside at anything below 55 degrees Fahrenheit, because that's when you start to see a bit more respiratory issues, because the first thing that's going to happen is they're going to catch things similar to our colds.
Can they, I know their indoor area is just right next to us here. Can they come in and it's a cold, nice but beautiful day?
Yes, and on days where it fluctuates very closely to our temperature guidelines, we'll leave it open so they have the ability to go in and out, so they're able to regulate it and also come back out when the sun's out. But once we start getting consistently cold temperatures, we'll put them inside just for their safety.
Now, in one of our last presentations, we learned about enrichment and training. What of enrichment do they like? And again, as a reminder for our folks out there, enrichment are those things that we give the animals that mentally and physically stimulate them to continually have them be active, both in their brains as well as in their bodies. And then training is different ways that we can make sure that the animals are that we're able to work with the animals in the way that we need to keep them healthiest.
So enrichment for reptiles is a little difficult because there's not really the sense of play or learning development in the same sense as a mammal. So very important things for browse with these guys is their general diet is mostly leafy greens, but we can also give them browse, which are scattered leaves from different trees, different shrubs, and we leave that on the branch so they have the ability to experience that, bringing in novel food items, so they have to work their muscles differently. If we throw in some fruits, if one day I have extra apples, I'm able to give them apples as a food enrichment. But their yard itself allows for a variety of activities. They have different mud wallows where they can cool down as opposed to going into the water. If they want to swim, they can go into their pool and swim. If they want to dig, this soil is very easily accessible for the tortoises. So it may not look like they have toys, but they have plenty of stuff to enrich their minds with and their behaviors here.
That's great. Are there any training techniques that we do with them?
Not really. We try to practice doing blood draws, so they don't retract when we come up to actually do them. But in terms of training, we utilize training for reptiles more for their safety and our safety. These are very safe animals for us to be around. So you could consider bringing them inside as a training, but more often than not, we're doing that as a way to make sure that they're safe. And if they don't recognize that going inside is warmer, we assist them, because at that point it's more of just making sure that our tortoises live a long, healthy life.
I know before we went on air, one of the things that you had mentioned is they're pretty strong, and if we are not careful, they'll just push us right over.
I mean, they have to lift upward anywhere from as low as 170, 180 pounds to close to 400 pounds off the ground with their legs. And so they are very, very strong animals. And us being tall and not close to the ground, we can easily get knocked over if we're not paying attention.
I know this is one of the animals that we have the Wild Encounters opportunity for guests to come to. Tell us a little bit about that opportunity that guests can upsell or purchase an additional adventure for.
So our Wild Encounters with the Tortoises, we have guests that come into the exhibit with me or with one of the other keepers, and we're able to have feeding experiences. We'll usually do carrots or other long vegetables. We'll have the ability to touch them. We get to feel the differences in their shells and the different scales on their body, where they are in relation, and it'll be an educational thing as well. A lot of people, they see the tortoises, they really think they're cute, they really think they're interesting. When we get in, we get to talk about the cool behaviors or the anatomy of the animals in a much up close way.
I have to admit, it's awesome. Every time I'm in here, it's a whole different experience to be able to be this close to them and to really watch them. And that's one of the things I always encourage people. When you come to the zoo, don't just walk by, but especially with magnificent animals like this, take a moment to just stop and watch them. It's almost like it's just a smooth dance as they're going with their movements. Everything seems very thought out as they go. So, gosh, Josh, you've shared a lot of great information with us. Out there, do you guys have any questions for us on the Aldabra tortoises or about turtles and tortoises as general? I have one. We've said turtle, we've said tortoise, but we've never explained what's what.
So, tortoises, in the most basic terms, following, family lines and just how they're related to each other, tortoises are a type of turtle. If you call it a turtle, it's not as specific as you can get, but it's not wrong. Tortoises generally have a domed shell. They're generally land-dwelling. They'll spend a majority of their time on the land, and they have those big, stocky legs that are primarily just used for walking and digging. Turtles spend a lot of their time in the water, not all turtles, and they generally have claws as opposed to the spade-like toes of our tortoises here, and they generally have a smoother shell so they can move through the water better.
So you could say all tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises.
Yes, exactly.
Kind of like all toads are frogs, but not all frogs are toads.
Close, yes.
So great questions out there. What questions do you guys have for us?
One of the questions that come up, we could see that they're eating some carrots. They want to know about the bite power. Does it hurt? Does it just break your finger, or could you actually bite it off? Like, what is their bite power?
I don't know the exact pressure number off the top of my head for these guys, but it is very, 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 very strong. They generally use their bite force and muscle movement back to break off food items. It's not all their jaw. So if a person were to get bit by them, it would hurt, but it's not really they're taking anything off of you. Obviously, if you left your hand in there as opposed to retracting out of a reaction, they could do damage and it would hurt, but these animals are slow browsers. So you definitely have more than ample opportunity to remove yourself from that situation if it were to come up. But they have very strong teeth that they use to eat a wide variety of vegetation with. So they have to be able to get through all sorts of different leaves.
We watched them earlier, and hopefully just a moment ago, take that orange and just squish it. And you guys think about it. If you took an orange in your hands and just tried to squish it, that's pretty hard. Don't go out there and do that in your kitchen. Your families would get mad at me. But it takes a lot of force, a lot of pressure to do that. So you can really see how much pressure is out there. That's a great question. Any other tortoise questions?
I will have to say, I just reminded the audience to get ready for the selfies, and I'm glad our friends came back just in time for their selfies. The next question is, you mentioned these guys could live 100, maybe up to 200, 180 to 200 years. What about just those regular turtles we see in our backyards? What's the life expectancy of some of those friends that we have maybe around our houses or where we hike and stuff?
It definitely depends on the individual species, but turtles can live a very long time. I would say you could expect native tortoises to live at least 20, 30 years if they are a healthy individual. But once again, without being there from egg hatch to animal death, it's very hard to get a potential maximum or high average. And animals in captivity generally live a lot longer than they would out in the wild. But with reptiles, it's very unknown because it's very hard for us to get that information for wild animals.
So a question is, I know the shell is just part of them. They can't actually live without their shell, but is it like what makes our fingernails and things like that? Is it similar to that's how it's built inside of a tortoise?
So it's the shell itself is just layer after layer after layer of keratin. And we have that in our fingernails, but at a very smaller scale. And so if you were to lose your fingernail, it grows back bit by bit by bit, and it has a stopping point. Their shells really don't. They have indeterminate growth. So they reach an adulthood stage, a adult size, and then their growth pattern goes from drastic to very, very slow, but continually up. So in terms of similarity to our fingernails, it's close, but they can keep growing. They can keep repairing their shells over time. Yes, and you guys can see maybe on this part of the shell a portion that broke away, and that's just normal wear and tear for a tortoise. He took that damage some time ago, but this would eventually just fill in, just like everything else. It just gets replaced over time.
Josh, if we were able to look on the inside of the shell, what would we see? Is it all smooth on the inside?
So on the inside, you would see, if you were to haul out the shell, pull everything else out other than the shell, you'd see what looks like the layout of a spine on the top of it. And that's because their spines are fused to their shells.
Okay.
Fascinating.
I have to repeat it if they don't hear me on my mic. When they sleep, do they tuck inside of it?
Aldabra tortoises generally don't.
The question is, when they sleep, do they tuck themselves into their shells?
Aldabra tortoises generally don't. If you guys come here at the zoo, you might see them laying down with all their legs splayed out and their long necks all the way out on the ground. They can tuck in and fall asleep, but if those muscles are relaxed, they're just going to go down. And Aldabra tortoises came from a place where there's no natural predators, so it's not like they had to be worried about a predator coming along in their sleep to come and get them. So they are very relaxed.
That's a great question. And teachers and students, if you're watching in the chat, I put a link to where that island is, of where these originated. Which friend is this that's right in front of you, Josh?
This one's Speed. He is our only male, our only boy.
I think this is a great time for a selfie, and we're down to the last 2 minutes. And so classes and students, if you guys want to get in front of Speed, he's kind of in a perfect position for us. You can kind of get off to the left. Again, teachers, if you hadn't had a chance to watch that video, it is on the website. This link will go live and you can rewatch to kind of do that compare and contrast that we talked about. And the Tortoise and the Hare video is on the website. So I'm going to just pause to let everybody get those selfies in. So give us about 20 seconds for selfies. I would sing for 20 seconds, but nobody needs to hear that. So I'm just going to set a quick timer.
No.
So the question was, do we do any foot or nail management on the tortoises? And we don't have to.
That will all be worn down naturally. That's why we have some concrete in here, and their pool is completely a rock bottom. Those are just things that are naturally worn down. If we didn't have the opportunity for that, then we would have to consider doing it, but they wear it down and they regrow it as needed.
Well, hopefully you got your selfies. Teachers, if you did not, there's actually a pause button at the bottom of your screen that you can pause real quickly to get those kiddos in front of your selfie. Thank you so much to Josh for sharing your information about these amazing creatures. And thank you to the Sedgwick County Zoo for sharing your time and day with us. Please thank everybody involved. We couldn't have done it without you guys. So we really, really appreciate your commitment to this and helping our learners learn today. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, everybody. We
Thank
loved
you.
having you virtually.